The membrane of reality above the snowy peaks of the Tokyo prefecture did not tear so much as it dissolved under the pressure of a frequency that had no business existing in the Taisho era. It began as a silent hemorrhage of violet antimatter radiation that stained the snow-laden pines, a violation of the local laws of physics that sent tremors through the spiritual ley lines of the mountain range. Local wildlife did not flee because their instincts could not categorize the threat. They simply ceased to breathe, their lungs paralyzed by the sudden, violent displacement of atmosphere caused by the intruder. From this bruising wound in the sky, a shape of jagged composite armor and burning circuitry fell like a stone cast by a furious god. It was not a meteor. It was a man encased in the pinnacle of Western industrial tactical science, screaming through the thin barrier separating a world of logic from a world of ancient blood. The Batwing, or what remained of its fuselage, disintegrated upon entry, the wreckage scattering across the tree line in a hail of burning carbon fiber that hissed against the frozen earth. The silence of the winter forest was annihilated by the impact, a cratering event that snapped 100-year-old cedars like matchsticks and sent a shockwave of dirt and steam rolling down the valley. Bruce Wayne hit the ground with force enough to shatter the tectonic plate of his own sternum. Had the suit's kinetic gel weave not hardened instantly to absorb the shock, he did not lose consciousness. His training, forged in the fires of Ra's al Ghul's instruction and the brutal alleys of Gotham, overrode the biological imperative to shut down. He rolled, gasping for air that tasted wrong. It was too clean, too thin, lacking the heavy metals and industrial sulfur of Gotham's smog, but thick with the copper tang of spilled blood and the sickeningly sweet scent of unseen flowers. The heads-up display in his cowl flickered and died, rebooting in emergency mode with a cascade of red error text. The satellite uplink was dead. The Wayne Tech network was non-existent. The constellations above him, glimpsed through the smoke of his burning equipment, were aligned in a pattern that suggested he had not moved in space. But the lack of light pollution was absolute. He was a blind man who had suddenly been given sight in a world he did not recognize. The crash had drawn attention. It was not the curiosity of a predator seeking a meal, but the arrogance of a creature that knew it, sat at the apex of the food chain. Out of the shadows of the cedar trees, a figure emerged. It wore the tattered remains of a peasant's kimono, but its skin was pale as moonlight and veined with throbbing, unnatural vitality. The creature did not walk. It slid over the snow, leaving no footprints. A ghost with physical mass. To the detective's rebooting tactical sensors, the thermal signature was impossible. The being before him registered with a body temperature of absolute zero, yet it was moving with fluid, explosive speed. Batman, still reeling from the concussive trauma of interdimensional transit, instinctively reached for his utility belt. His gauntlets, damaged but functional, engaged the grapple. He fired without a thought. The monofilament line, capable of holding half a ton of shear weight, wrapped around the creature's neck. In Gotham, this ended the fight. Here, the creature merely smiled, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, and snapped the high tensile steel cord with a twitch of its neck muscles as if it were a spiderweb. This was the first lesson of the convergence. Logic, the great weapon of the Dark Knight, held no currency here. The creature lunged, covering 20 meters in a heartbeat. Batman dodged, relying on muscle memory that had outpaced human limitations. But the wind of the creature's passing shredded the cape on his left shoulder. He deployed a cluster of flashbang grenades, blinding white phosphorus igniting the clearing. The demon shrieked, not in pain, but in annoyance. As the chemical smoke cleared, Bruce saw the damage he had inflicted with 3 explosive batarangs. The shrapnel was embedded deep in the creature's chest and eye socket, but the metal was already pushing itself out, the flesh knitting together with a wet, squelching sound. There was no blood loss. There was no shock. There was only an infinite, hungry malice. For the first time in years, the tactical computer in Bruce Wayne's mind returned a frantic error message. He was fighting a biological impossibility. The night was not his ally here. The night belonged to them. The encounter in the snow-choked cedar forest did not end with a victory, but with a tactical withdrawal dictated by the rising sun. Bruce Wayne had exhausted 3 canisters of military-grade tear gas, 2 charges of plastic explosive, and a barrage of taser rounds that it would have stopped a killer whale. Yet the creature merely paused, its flesh rippling and re-knitting with a sickening biological eagerness. It was only when the first grey light of dawn touched the mountain peaks that the demon recoiled. The monster did not flee from Batman. It fled from the light, dissolving into the shadows of the dense undergrowth with a hiss of burning flesh where a stray ray of sun caught its ankle. Batman stood amidst the shattered timber, his chest heaving against the restricted movement of his damaged suit. His cowl recorded the retreat, analyzing the creature's velocity and the distinct chemical signature of its vaporization. It was not magic. It was a photophobic cellular reaction, so violent it mimicked combustion. He was alive not because of his preparation, but because of planetary rotation. That fact sat in his gut like lead. He engaged the stealth protocol on his suit, effectively vanishing into the tree line. But the technology was glitching, the active camouflage flickering in and out as the power cells struggled to harmonize with the ambient atmospheric density. He needed a base of operations. The crash site was compromised. He spent the next 6 hours traversing the mountain range, moving with the deliberate, agonizing slowness of a wounded predator. He found a limestone cavern high up on a windswept ridge, hidden from the valley floor, but offering a vantage point over the scattered settlements below. Here, the Dark Knight began the process of deconstruction. He stripped off the outer plating of the batsuit, revealing the bruised and battered human form beneath. He was bleeding from internal micro-tears, his ribs screaming with every breath. But the pain was a familiar data point, something to be categorized and ignored. He set up a localized perimeter, using the remaining proximity sensors, turning the cave into a sterile bubble of high-tech surveillance in a world of feudal mysticism. His portable forensic lab, a ruggedized unit meant for Gotham crime scenes, hummed to life on emergency power. He fed it the sample he had scraped from the tree bark, a thick, viscous smear of the demon's blood. The results appeared on the holographic interface, and for the first time in his career, Bruce Wayne stared at data that defied the fundamental laws of biology. The cells were not dying. Separated from the host, exposed to the air, they continued to divide and mutate, consuming the slide itself. It was a cancer that acted with intent. The DNA structure was human, but rewritten by a retrovirus of impossible complexity, adding helixes that acted as energy storage capacitors. This was not a species. It was a plague. Days bled into nights as he observed the valley below. He tuned his cowl's audio receptors to pick up conversations from the village 3 miles downwind. The dialect was archaic Japanese, a variation he recognized from historical texts but spoken with a cadence that suggested isolation. They spoke of the demon attacks as one speaks of weather, inevitable, destructive, and beyond human control. He learned of the Demon Slayer core through whispered rumors, stories of swordsmen who walked the night with blades that could kill the immortals. Batman catalogued this information, his skepticism warring with the evidence of his own eyes. Swords. They were fighting biological weapons of mass destruction with tempered steel. It seemed suicidal, yet the villagers spoke of them with a reverence reserved for deities. He needed to understand the mechanics of their success. If standard ballistics failed and explosives only delayed, what was special about their steel? He began to venture out at twilight, a phantom haunting the edges of the village. He stole clothes, a heavy haori and tatsuke hakama, leaving gold coins from his emergency cash that were worth exponentially more than the garments. He blended in, masking his face, moving through the dirt streets like a shadow. He saw the wisteria flowers hung in doorways and analyzed their pollen. It contained a neurotoxin, harmless to humans but, according to his simulations, based on the blood sample, debilitating to the regenerative factor of the demon cells. It was a biological deterrent. The locals used it as a charm. Batman saw it as a chemical weapon ingredient. His first contact with the Demon Slayer core occurred on the 7th night. The atmospheric pressure dropped, and the smell of ozone and rot flooded the valley. Batman was perched on the roof of a rice storehouse, his thermal vision scanning the tree line. A scream tore through the silence, high and terrified. He moved. He did not glide. His cape was shredded. He utilized the grapple gun and parkour, moving across the tiled rooftops with a heavy, percussive rhythm that was distinct from the silent running of the ninja or the slayers. He dropped into the alleyway where a woman was being cornered by a creature that looked like a swollen, multi-limbed spider. It was larger than the first one, its eyes holding the kanji for lower rank, though Batman could not yet decipher the hierarchy. The demon lunged, mandibles clicking, but was intercepted by a blur of water and blue cloth. A young man, no older than 15, wearing a checkered haori, stepped between the civilian and the monster. He breathed, a specific rhythmic inhalation that Batman's audio sensors picked up as a pressurized oxygen intake, expanding lung capacity and flooding the blood with adrenaline. The boy swung a black sword, trailing a visual illusion of crashing waves. The blade severed the demon's arm. Batman watched from the shadows, analyzing the boy's technique. It was inefficient. The movements were telegraphed, reliant on emotion and form rather than economy of motion. Yet the sword cut through the demon's flesh like a laser. The arm did not regenerate immediately. The boy, Tanjiro Kamado, shouted a warning to the civilian to run, his focus absolute. But the demon was fast. It spun, shooting a web of acidic silk that pinned the young slayer's sword arm to the wall. The boy cried out, struggling, as the demon prepared to decapitate him. Logic dictated that Batman intervene. Logic also dictated that he assess the weapon. He did both. He dropped from the roof, a flashbang grenade priming in his hand. He did not aim for the demon. He aimed for the sensory overload. The explosion turned the alley white. The demon shrieked, clutching its multiple eyes. In that second of confusion, Batman was on it. He didn't use a sword. He used a gauntlet-mounted pneumatic ram, delivering 2,000 pounds of force into the creature's solar plexus, caving in its chest cavity and sending it smashing through the back wall of the storehouse. Tanjiro blinked, his vision swimming from the flash to see a towering figure in black armor standing over him. The figure did not offer a hand. It reached out and ripped the acidic web from Tanjiro's arm with a strength that rivaled a demon's, then grabbed the boy by the collar of his uniform. Batman dragged him into the cover of the shadows, just as the demon roared and charged the empty space they had occupied seconds ago. Batman shoved Tanjiro against the wood of a nearby fence, his voice a gravelly, synthesized growl emerging from the cowl's vocoder. He demanded to know the alloy composition of the blade. Tanjiro, disoriented and sensing no malice but an overwhelming aura of intimidation, stammered that it was scarlet crimson iron and scarlet crimson ore, bathed in sunlight. Sunlight. The variable confirmed. Batman released the boy, turning back to the fight. The demon had located them. It was angry, its chest cavity inflating as it healed. It recognized Batman not as a meal, but as a threat that smelled of strange oils and cold metal. The fight that followed was a collision of two paradigms. Tanjiro tried to rejoin the battle, shouting about breath forms and openings, but Batman operated on a frequency of brutal pragmatism. He deployed a specialized net, the fibers coated in a synthesized concentrate of the wisteria extract he had distilled in the cave. The net wrapped around the spider demon, and the creature began to smoke, its skin blistering as if burned by acid. It thrashed, screaming, its strength sapped. Tanjiro raised his sword to deliver the final blow, to sever the head, but Batman caught his wrist. The boy looked up shocked. Batman's grip was iron. He stated that the creature was incapacitated, and that killing it was unnecessary if it could be contained. He wanted to study it. He wanted to cure it. Tanjiro looked at the dark mask, seeing the white lenses narrowing, and realized this man, this warrior, did not understand the tragedy of their world. He tried to explain that demons could not be cured, that death was their only salvation, but Batman was already moving, securing the thrashing, dissolving demon with high tensile cables. The ideological impasse was shattered by the arrival of the second demon. It dropped from the sky without sound, a massive mass of muscle and bone acting as a kinetic impactor. This one was different. It did not speak. It simply destroyed. The shockwave of its landing blew the storehouse apart, sending splinters and stone flying like shrapnel. Batman took the brunt of the blast to shield the civilian who hadn't cleared the radius. His armor integrity dropped to 40%. He was thrown into the mud, his vision flickering red. Through the haze he saw Tanjiro engaging the new threat, his water-breathing form struggling against the sheer density of the new enemy. This was a brutal awakening. Batman realized he could not simply subdue these things. The containment net was shredded in seconds. The first demon, partially healed and enraged, broke free. Now there were two. Batman forced himself up, overriding the pain blockers. He tapped his belt, activating the call signal for the Batmobile, only to remember the silence of the receiver. He was alone. He had to adapt. He looked at Tanjiro's sword, then at the shattered remains of a sun-soaked roof tile. He improvised. He grabbed a handful of magnesium flares and bound them together with a strip of wisteria-soaked cloth. He wasn't a swordsman, but he was a marksman. He waited for the opening. Tanjiro was being driven back, his blade chipping under the assault. The boy was shouting, desperate, calling upon a power he couldn't quite master. Batman saw the thread, not the metaphysical one Tanjiro saw, but the tactical vector. He launched the flare cluster. It didn't hit the demon. It hit the iron lantern hanging directly above the creature's head. The explosion showered the monster in burning oil and blinding white light. It screamed, distracted. Batman tackled Tanjiro, rolling them both out of the path of a devastating counterswipe. They landed in the mud, breath mingling in the cold air. For a moment, the Knight and the Slayer were allies by necessity. Batman commanded the boy to strike the neck. He didn't like it. It violated every code he had written for himself in blood. But the math was undeniable. These things would not stop until they were dismembered. Tanjiro nodded, sensing the shift in the strange warrior's intent. He breathed, water condensing around his blade, and executed the water surface slash. The head fell. The silence that followed was heavy. The demon's body turned to ash, drifting away on the wind. Batman stood, watching the disintegration with a clinical, horrified fascination. A human soul, trapped in a biological nightmare, released only by death. It was a failure of science, a failure of medicine. Tanjiro sheathed his sword, bowing deeply to the dark figure, thanking him for the assistance, but asking, with a genuine heartbreaking innocence, why he hesitated, why he tried to save a thing that ate children. Batman looked at the boy, his cape ragged, his armor scarred. He didn't answer. He couldn't explain that in his world, even the monsters were men, and men could be redeemed. Here, the line was absolute. He turned to leave, firing his grapple into the darkness, ascending rapidly away from the questions he wasn't ready to answer. He needed to upgrade his arsenal. He needed UV emitters. He needed a sword, not to kill, but to parry. And he needed to find the man who made these monsters. Back in the cave, the isolation pressed in on him. He analyzed the combat data. The wisteria was effective but slow. The physical trauma required to stop a demon was excessive. He began to forge. He didn't have access to Wayne Enterprises' R&D, but he had the raw materials of the mountain and the salvage from the Batwing. He melted down the carbon fiber fuselage, mixing it with the iron sands he found in the riverbed, attempting to create a composite material. He needed a weapon that could channel the solar energy he was now frantically trying to capture with the damaged solar cells of his suit. He worked through the pain, through the hunger. He was Bruce Wayne. He was Batman. He would solve this, but the world was not waiting for him to catch up. News of the Black Iron Demon began to spread. The Kasugai crows chattered in the skies, carrying messages to the headquarters of the Demon Slayer Corps. They spoke of a warrior who used fire and thunder, but carried no sword, who fought demons with his bare hands and strange metal ropes. This anomaly attracted the attention of the hashira. In the Butterfly Mansion, Shinobu Kocho read the reports with a dangerous smile. A man who used poisons. A man who tried to capture rather than kill. It sounded like a blasphemy, or perhaps a twisted mirror of her own desires. She dispatched a message to Giyu Tomioka, who was patrolling the northern districts. The order was clear. Investigate the anomaly. If he is a demon, kill him. If he is a human protecting demons, kill him. If he is something else, determine the threat level. Batman was unaware of the crosshairs settling on his back. He was focused on the larger pattern. He had mapped the attacks in the region. They were not random. They were probing, searching for something. The blue spider lily. He had heard the term in the village. A myth. But demons didn't hunt myths. They hunted power. He realized that to stop this, he couldn't just fight the foot soldiers. He had to dismantle the command structure. He needed to interrogate a high-ranking demon. He needed bait. And he realized, with a grim sense of irony, that he was the bait. He was the unknown variable. He began to modify his suit, stripping away the stealth plating and reinforcing the impact zones. He painted the bat symbol on his chest, not with black polymer, but with a mixture of lacquer and wisteria extract. He was turning himself into a toxic beacon, a real storm bringing heavy snow that buried the tracks of the living and the dead. Batman stood at the entrance of his cave, watching the valley. His sensors picked up a new signal. It was faint, disciplined, and moving with a speed that rivaled the demons. A human heartbeat, but one so slow and controlled it bordered on hibernation. Someone was coming, someone strong. He checked his utility belt, smoke pellets, wisteria darts, UV flashlights, and a new tool, a crude, jagged blade forged from the Batwing's landing gear, tempered in the cold mountain stream. He wasn't a slayer. He was a detective, and the investigation was about to turn violent. The wind howled, carrying the scent of blood and tea. The collision was inevitable. The dark night waited, the snow accumulating on his shoulders like a shroud, as the world of the demon slayers prepared to reject the foreign antibody that had entered its bloodstream. The water hashira arrived, not with the thunderous announcement of a storm, but with the suffocating pressure of the deep ocean. Giyu Tomioka stood at the mouth of the limestone cavern, the wind whipping his mismatched haori around his stillness. To the naked eye, he was merely a swordsman standing in the snow. To the sophisticated sensor array of the Bat Cave's perimeter defense, he was an anomaly of kinetic potential. The motion trackers had not triggered. The laser tripwires had not been broken. The man had simply displaced the air where he stood, existing between the pulses of the scanning frequency. Batman watched him from the shadows of the cave ceiling, hanging inverted, his cape wrapped tight around his armored bulk. The thermal imaging painted Giyu in cool blues and greens, his heart rate impossibly slow, thudding once for every 3 beats of a normal human. This was the apex of the local warrior caste. The detective analyzed the stance, relaxed, sword undrawn. Yet the center of gravity was perfect, ready to explode in any direction. There was no opening. Batman dropped a smoke pellet. It was a standard opening gambit, designed to disorient and force the opponent to react to a loss of vision. The grey cloud billowed instantly, filling the cavern entrance. In Gotham, thugs coughed and panicked. In the mountains of Japan, Giyu Tomioka did not blink. He inhaled, a sharp whistling sound that cut through the hiss of the smoke. Fourth form, striking tide. The movement was a blur that the human eye would have missed, but the high-speed camera in the cowl caught it frame by frame. Giyu did not slash blindly. He flowed. He moved through the smoke as if he were liquid, his blade curving in a continuous fluid arc that deflected the 3 batarangs Batman had thrown from the darkness. The steel rang against the throwing stars, the sound distinct and musical. Giyu was not fighting the smoke. He was sensing the disturbance in the air current caused by the projectiles. He turned, his dead eyes locking onto the exact patch of darkness where Batman crouched. Batman moved. He fired the grapple gun, swinging across the stalactites, dropping a cluster of flashbangs. The cavern erupted in blinding light and deafening sound. Giyu flinched, his rhythm broken for a fraction of a second. That was all the Dark Knight needed. He descended, his cape hardening into a glider foil, slamming into the hashira with the force of a falling anvil. They hit the stone floor, rolling. Batman relied on mass and leverage, his armored gauntlets locking Giyu's sword arm. He attempted a disarming maneuver, a twisting lock that would snap the radius of a normal man. Giyu's arm did not snap. It felt like trying to bend a steel rod. The hashira twisted his hips, leverage generated from the breath in his lungs, and threw Batman, 240 pounds of man and armor, across the cave. Batman impacted the rock wall, cracking the stone. His armor warnings flashed amber. Rib fractures detected. The fight escalated. Batman realized he could not engage in a contest of speed or strength. He switched to area denial. He flooded the floor with the quick hardening foam, aiming to cement Giyu's feet to the ground. Giyu jumped, seeing the trap, and ran along the walls, his body horizontal to the ground. Third form, flowing dance. The blade moved like a ribbon of water, seeking the gaps in the Batman's armor. A slash caught the Kevlar weave at the shoulder, slicing through the plating and drawing blood. It was a clean, surgical cut. Batman grunted, responding with a taser barrage. The electrified darts flew in a spread pattern. Giyu deflected too, but the third caught his haori. The voltage discharged, 50,000 volts. Giyu stiffened, his breath hitching, but he did not fall. He forced a breath through the pain, the oxygen seemingly purging the paralysis from his muscles. He severed the wires with a flick of his wrist. They separated, standing 20 feet apart in the wrecked cave. The forensic lab hummed in the background, the only sound in the tense silence. Giyu spoke first, his voice flat. He identified Batman not as a demon, but as a disturbance. He accused him of interfering with the natural order, of harboring the smell of the unclean. Batman retorted, his synthesizer voice deep and grinding, demanding to know why the Corps sent a child assassin to do a detective's job. He classified Giyu as a threat to public safety, a vigilante operating without oversight. It was a mirror conversation, two absolute forms of justice failing to recognize the reflection. The standoff was broken not by aggression, but by the console of the forensic computer. The sample, the demon blood Batman had been cultivating, began to boil. The alarm screamed, a high-pitched electronic wail that seemed alien in the stone echo chamber. On the screen, the cellular mitosis rate spiked to infinity. The blood was reacting, not to heat, not to chemical stimulus, but to proximity. Batman turned, his cape swirling. He saw the glass slide crack. The drop of blood expanded, erupting into a mass of flesh that consumed the microscope, then the table. It was growing, pulling matter from the air itself. A mouth formed in the red sludge, screaming a name that made the air turn frigid. Muzan. Giyu's eyes widened. He recognized the pressure. It was not a lower moon. It was a direct curse, a cellular activation triggered by the progenitor. The blood Batman had isolated was acting as a beacon. The cave shook. From the mass of flesh, bone spurs shot out, shattering the expensive Wayne Tech equipment. The flesh began to reform, taking the shape of a twisted, incomplete humanoid. It wasn't a true demon. It was a biological bomb, a mass of uncontrolled regeneration fueled by the high-density energy cells Batman had used to power his lab. The creature absorbed the lithium-ion battery pack. Sparks flew as the flesh fused with the technology. The demon roared, and the sound was a mix of a beast's scream and static interference. Batman realized his mistake instantly. He had treated the blood as a pathogen, assuming it needed a host. He didn't understand that the blood was a fragment of a god-complex consciousness. He shouted at Giyu to run, deploying explosive gel on the cave support pillars. He intended to bury the mistake. Giyu, however, did not run. He advanced. The hashira recognized that burying a demon did not kill it. It only gave it darkness in which to grow. He charged the abomination, his blade glowing with blue energy. Water-breathing, first form. He aimed for the neck. But the creature was different. It had absorbed the localized force field generator Batman had been prototyping. The sword struck an invisible barrier of hard light energy, shattering the kinetic force of the blow. The feedback threw Giyu backward. The demon-machine hybrid lashed out with a whip of flesh and copper wire, catching Giyu in the midsection. The armor of the Demon Slayer Corps held, but the impact broke ribs. Batman saw the equation change. Magic had fused with technology. He had armed the enemy. The creature burst through the cave entrance, leaping out into the snowy night. It wasn't fighting them. It was hunting. It could sense the largest concentration of biomass nearby. The village. The settlement Batman had been watching. The people he had been trying to understand. The creature moved with the speed of a demon and the relentless drive of a machine. It skittered down the mountainside, an avalanche of meat and metal. Batman and Giyu followed. They descended the mountain, an uneasy alliance forged in catastrophe. Batman deployed his cape glider, diving through the air, while Giyu surfed the snow, sliding with impossible grace. They arrived too late to prevent the breach. The creature had crashed through the wooden gate of the village like a tank. It was absorbing the wisteria flowers, the technology in its system metabolizing the poison and turning it into heat. It breathed fire, not demon magic, but burning lithium vented from its chest. The screams began. This was the catastrophic disruption. The village, a place of paper and wood, ignited instantly. Batman landed in the town square, his heart hammering against his ribs. He saw the creature tear the roof off a house. He saw a family huddled inside. He didn't think. He acted. He fired his grapple, snagging the creature's mechanical arm, and engaged the winch motor to maximum torque. The cable went taut. The creature halted, roaring, its attention shifting to the black night. Batman anchored himself to a stone torii gate, straining against the pull. He bought them 4 seconds. It was enough for the family to run. Giyu arrived a heartbeat later. He saw the fires. He saw the carnage. His face remained a mask, but his aura flared with cold rage. He blamed the foreigner. He blamed the metal man who played with things he didn't understand. Giyu moved through the burning streets, cutting down the smaller spawn the creature was beginning to shed. Lumps of flesh that detached and formed into dog-sized mouths. He was a whirlwind of steel, saving who he could. But for every life he saved, the fire took 2. The hybrid demon turned on Batman. It recognized the technology. It wanted the rest of the suit. It lunged, snapping the grapple line. Batman dodged, but the creature was learning. It anticipated the dodge. A fist of bone and battery casing slammed into Batman, sending him crashing through the wall of a sake brewery. The smell of alcohol and smoke filled his helmet. His HUD was a chaotic mess of red warnings. Armor integrity at critical. Power levels draining. The suit's reactor was leaking radiation. Batman lay in the debris, struggling to rise. He watched through the shattered wall as Giyu engaged the beast. The hashira was magnificent. He was fighting a creature that defied the laws of his world, a monster that had no neck to slice, only a shifting core of energy. Giyu used the 11th form, dead calm. He created a zone of absolute stillness amidst the inferno. The creature's attacks, spikes of bone, blasts of heat, dissipated as they entered his reach. But Giyu could not attack. He was trapped in a defensive loop. If he moved to strike, the defense would fall, and the heat would incinerate him. He was buying time for a solution that didn't exist. Batman saw the tactical layout. Giyu would die in 3 minutes when his stamina failed. The village would be erased. The creature would move to the next town, growing stronger, integrating more matter. There was only one option. A contingency Batman had built into the Batwing survival kit, salvaged and stored in his belt. A compact thermal charge. A miniature sun. It was designed to destroy the Bat-Tech to prevent reverse engineering. It would vaporize everything within a 50-meter radius. He looked at Giyu. He looked at the villagers fleeing into the woods. He looked at the monster he had helped create. The no-kill rule echoed in his mind, a mocking reminder of a city far away. But this wasn't murder. This was sanitation. This was the trolley problem made flesh. He pulled the device from his belt. It was a small sphere, pulsating with amber light. He needed to get it inside the creature. Batman overrode the safety protocols on his suit's servos. He forced the damaged hydraulics to stand. He picked up a discarded iron rod, jamming it into the exhaust port of his gauntlet. He wasn't a swordsman, but he needed to be a lancer. He activated the last of his suit's thrusters. He didn't glide, he launched himself as a missile. He hit the creature from behind, the impact shaking the ground. The demon roared, thrashing, but Batman held on, his gauntlets digging into the wet, hot flesh. He climbed the abomination, moving towards the glowing core where the lithium battery pulsed. Giyu saw him. The hashira's eyes widened, breaking his calm for the first time. He understood the intent. He saw the sphere in Batman's hand. Batman jammed the thermal charge into the open wound of the creature's chest. He armed it. 5 seconds. He kicked away, firing a reverse grapple to the ground, dragging himself out of the immediate kill zone. He shouted at Giyu, "Move!" Giyu didn't hesitate. He collapsed his form, springing backward with the speed of a receding tide. The explosion was silent at first, a flash of pure, expanding light that turned the night into noon. Then came the sound, a crack that shattered every window for miles. The thermal sphere detonated, creating a localized plasma field. The demon machine screamed as it was atomized, its cellular regeneration outpaced by the rate of disintegration. The fire of the village was snuffed out by the vacuum of the explosion, replaced by a crater of glass and smoking earth. Batman hit the ground hard, the shockwave tumbling him like a rag doll. His suit locked up, frozen. He lay in the snow, the heat of the blast washing over him. Silence returned to the mountain. He forced his cowl to open, gasping for the cold air. He dragged himself to a sitting position. The creature was gone. The center of the village was gone. A crater smoked where the brewery had been. Giyu Tomioka stood at the edge of the crater. He was singed. His hari burned at the edges, but alive. He looked down at the dark night. There was no gratitude in his eyes. There was only judgment. He surveyed the ruin. The villagers who had survived were emerging from the woods, wailing as they saw the destruction of their homes. They didn't see a savior. They saw a demon of iron who had brought fire from the mountain. Giyu walked over to Batman. He drew his sword. The blade was chipped, the edge dull from the battle. He pointed the tip at Batman's throat. "You brought this," Giyu said. It wasn't a question. "Your tools, your ways, they do not belong here." Batman stared up at the steel. He couldn't deny it. The blood sample, the power source. It was his arrogance that had fueled the monster. He had tried to apply Gotham's science to a world of curses, and innocent people had paid the price. He didn't move to defend himself. "Do it," Batman rasped. "If that's the law here." Giyu stared at him for a long moment. Then he sheathed his sword with a sharp click. "Death is too easy. You will carry this. You will see what your presence costs." Giyu turned his back on the dark night. "The core knows you now. You are not a hunter. You are a calamity. Do not let me see you again." The hashira vanished into the smoke, moving to aid the survivors. Batman was left alone in the wreckage. He struggled to his feet, his suit dead weight. He was stripped of his base, his resources, and his moral high ground. He was a pariah. He limped away from the village into the deep woods. The pain in his body was nothing compared to the fracture in his psyche. He had broken the world he tried to save. He needed a new way. Technology had failed. Science had turned into a weapon for the enemy. If he was to survive, if he was to atone, he could not be the Batman of Gotham. He had to become something else, something that understood the blood and the steel. As he walked, the snow began to fall again, covering the ashes. But the stain remained. From the shadows of the tree line, a Kasugai crow watched him, its bead-like eyes recording every limp step. It took flight, cawing loudly, carrying the news to the Ubuyashiki estate. The message was clear. The Iron Man has fallen. The Ronin rises. In the distance, deep in the Infinity Castle, Muzan Kibutsuji opened his eyes. He had felt the surge. He had tasted the strange electric energy of the blood that had burned. It was new. It was powerful. And he wanted more. He signaled his upper moons. The hunt for the man in black armor had officially moved from a curiosity to a priority. Batman found a hollow beneath the roots of a great cedar. He collapsed, his vision blurring. He began to strip the damaged armor off, piece by piece. The Kevlar, the ceramic plating, the circuitry. He cast it aside. It was dead weight. He kept the undersuit, the thermal weave. He kept the belt. But the symbol, the bat on the chest, was scorched and unrecognizable. He took a handful of ash from the ground and rubbed it over the plating, darkening it to a matte, void black. He needed a teacher. He needed to understand the breath. Not to use magic, but to understand the physics of this reality, so he could break them properly next time. He remembered the boy, Tanjiro, the one with the kind eyes and the hard head. Bruce Wayne closed his eyes, his mind already formulating a new strategy. Phase 1 was a failure. Phase 2 would be integration. He would not conquer this world. He would learn to breathe in it. And then he would suffocate the demons who plagued it. The wind howled, sounding like the screams of the villagers he failed to save. It was the only lullaby the dark night deserved. A survivor crawling through the snow, leaving a trail of blood and broken tech behind him. The catastrophe was complete. The Batman was dead. The long night had truly begun. The mountain path to Mount Sagiri was not a road, but a trail of attrition carved into the earth. Bruce Wayne walked it not as a warrior, but as a penitent ghost. He had discarded the charred remains of the Batsuit's outer plating, burying the high-grade composites in a deep ravine miles back, covering the site with heavy stones to prevent scavenging. He wore the ragged undersuit mesh, now patched with rough hemp cloth stolen from a scarecrow, and a straw cloak that offered minimal protection against the biting wind. He was feverish. The injuries from the battle with the hybrid demon had not healed. They had settled into a deep, grinding ache that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He carried no technology save for the few salvageable microprocessors hidden in the hollow heel of his boot and the utility belt, now stripped of its high-tech ordnance and filled with stones, herbs, and ash. He was stripping himself down to the core, deconstructing the Batman to find the human variable that could survive this world. He did not seek Tanjiro Kamado's teacher to learn how to swing a sword. He sought him to understand the physics of the impossible. Sakonji Urukadaki found him before he reached the summit. The masked trainer did not emerge from the mist. He simply ceased to be a part of the landscape and became a figure blocking the path. The Tengu mask stared down at the foreigner. Urokodaki smelled the blood, old, stale, and copper-rich, and he smelled the ash of the village that had burned. He smelled the chemical tang of the strange oils Bruce used to treat his wounds. But mostly, he smelled a resolve so dense it distorted the air. There was no greeting. Urokodaki told him to turn back, stating that the mountain was a place for the living to learn how to die, not for the dead to pretend they were alive. Bruce did not stop. He fell to his knees, not in supplication, but because his right leg finally gave out under the strain of a hairline fracture. He looked up, his eyes rimmed with red, and spoke the dialect he had been practicing. He did not ask for training. He stated a transaction. He possessed knowledge of the enemy's evolution. He had seen the biology of the demons adapt to technology. He offered this intelligence in exchange for the technique of the breath. Urokodaki accepted him, not out of kindness, but out of necessity. The Kasugai crows had brought news of the iron calamity. If this man was the source, he needed to be watched. If he was a weapon, he needed to be tempered. The training began that hour. It was not the training Tanjiro had endured. There was no teaching of forms, no water slicing. Bruce Wayne was 30-something years old, his body a map of scar tissue and healed fractures. He could not move with the elasticity of youth. Urokodaki realized quickly that trying to teach this man water breathing would shatter his bones. Instead, the former water hashira subjected Bruce to a regimen of respiratory conditioning designed to force the body past its biological fail-safes. They sat in the freezing waterfall, not to meditate, but to induce hypothermic shock, forcing Bruce to control his autonomic nervous system through will alone. Bruce applied his knowledge of Tibetan Tamo meditation and free-diving breath holds, synthesizing them with Urokodaki's instruction. He visualized the oxygen not as a spiritual force, but as fuel. He visualized his vascular system as a hydraulic network. When he breathed, he wasn't channeling water, he was pressurizing a machine. Weeks turned into months. Bruce did not sleep in the hut. He slept in the trees, hanging inverted to decompress his spine, wrapping himself in the dark cloak to blend with the bark. He began to forage, not just for food, but for chemistry. He found the ores in the riverbed, the scarlet crimson iron sand. He did not have a forge, but he had the understanding of exothermic reactions. He built a kiln from river clay and fueled it with charcoal he burned himself, using a bellows made from deer hide. He didn't make a katana. The katana was a weapon of elegance, and Bruce Wayne had lost his elegance in the fire. He forged plates, crude, heavy, dense plates of sun-soaked iron. He riveted them onto the knuckles of his gauntlets. He fashioned a short, serrated blade, more of a saw than a sword, weighted for hacking rather than slicing. It was ugly. It was heavy. It was a tool for breaking bones. Urokodaki watched this sacrilege with silent judgment, but he saw the logic. The foreigner did not intend to duel demons. He intended to dismantle them. The breakthrough came during a storm. Bruce was running the trap course, the air thin and electric. He was pushing his heart rate to 200 beats per minute, his lungs burning like they were filled with acid. He slipped on a wet route, plummeting toward a pit of sharpened bamboo. In that microsecond of freefall, the world slowed. It was the same sensation he had felt in Gotham when the grapple gun fired, the suspension of gravity. He inhaled, a sharp percussive intake that snapped his diaphragm down. Total concentration. But he didn't visualize water. He visualized the radar pulse, the sonar map, the air pressure shifting around the spikes. He twisted in midair, his body contorting with a violence that popped his shoulder joint, and grabbed the edge of the pit with his iron-clawed gauntlet. He hauled himself up, the wood splintering under his grip. He breathed out, steam hissing from his mask. He had accessed the strength, but the cost was immediate. He coughed blood. The capillaries in his lungs had burst under the pressure. He had found a way to match the demons, but it was tearing his human body apart. He categorized the failure. He needed to reinforce the internal structure. He needed armor on the inside. While Bruce reconstructed himself on the mountain, the world below was reacting to the imbalance he had created. The Demon Slayer core was in turmoil. The destruction of the village had been attributed to a foreign sorcerer. The hashira were divided. Some, like the stone hashira, prayed for the lost soul. Others, like the wind hashira, Sanemi Shinazugawa, demanded a purge. They saw the introduction of foreign technology as a corruption of their sacred duty. The master, Kagaya Ubuyashiki, remained silent, his foresight clouded by the sudden divergence in the timeline. But the true escalation came from the shadows. Muzan Kibutsuji had not forgotten the taste of the battery. He had not forgotten the efficiency of the thermal detonation. He desired that power. He did not send an upper moon to kill the Batman. He sent a retrieval team to capture the Artificer. He dispatched a cadre of specialized demons, enhanced with the blood of the lower moons, with specific orders: do not eat him, break him, bring the brain. The attack came on a moonless night. The mountain was silent, the insects dormant in the cold. Bruce was in his makeshift forge, tempering a new batch of iron caltrops. He didn't hear a twig snap. He felt the displacement of air pressure in the cavern. His cowl was gone, destroyed in the crash, but he had fashioned a new faceplate from the black iron, a partial mask that covered his nose and jaw, filtering the air and modulating his breath. He turned as the shadows elongated. 3 demons stood at the entrance. They were not the mindless hunger he had fought in the forest. These were assassins. They wore dark shinobi shozoku, their skin shifting color to match the stone. One had arms that extended like whips. Another had legs comprised of compressed spring-like muscle. The third was a sensory unit, its head a cluster of ears and eyes. They moved instantly. The whip demon lashed out, the flesh tentacles cracking the sound barrier. Bruce didn't dodge. He stood his ground and clapped his hands together. Not a prayer, but a trigger. The caltrops on the workbench were not just iron. They were laced with a concentrated flash powder he had distilled from mountain sulfur. The impact detonated the dust. A blinding flash filled the cave. In the disorienting whiteout, Bruce moved. He didn't use the breath of water. He used the darkness. He dropped a smoke bomb, primitive, made from sap and wet leaves, and vanished into the grey haze. The demons hissed, their enhanced vision useless in the chemical smoke. Bruce struck from the ceiling. He dropped onto the sensory demon, his iron-plated boots slamming into its shoulders. He didn't have the height for a lethal drop, so he used the momentum to drive his serrated blade into the creature's auditory cluster. The demon shrieked, a sound that vibrated the teeth in Bruce's skull. He twisted the blade, the sun-soaked iron burning the flesh, and ripped it free. The demon crumbled, its regeneration halted by the massive trauma to its brainstem. One down. The spring-legged demon charged, moving so fast it was a blur. It kicked, a blow meant to decapitate. Bruce blocked with his forearms, the iron gauntlets absorbing the impact. The force was like being hit by a car. He heard the radius bone in his left arm crack. Pain flooded his system, white and hot. He used it. He converted the pain into adrenaline. He grabbed the demon's leg before it could retract, digging his claws into the muscle. He inhaled, a jagged, grinding breath. Breath of the shadow, first form, blunt force trauma. It wasn't a poetic name. It was a statement of fact. He didn't slash. He headbutted the demon, the iron plate on his mask smashing into the creature's face. Once, twice, 3 times. The demon's skull caved in. It fell back, stunned. Bruce didn't hesitate. He jammed a handful of wisteria-soaked iron filings into the open wound of the demon's face. The creature convulsed, dissolving into ash as the poison hit the brain. The third demon, the whip user, retreated to the entrance. It realized the target was not a sorcerer, but a beast. It opened its mouth to scream a signal, to call for reinforcements. A blade of wind severed its head before the sound could escape. The head tumbled to the ground, a look of surprise frozen on its face. The body collapsed a second later. Bruce stood in the smoke, breathing heavily, clutching his broken arm. He looked up to the entrance. Standing there, Illuminated by the dying light of the forge was Sanemi Shinazugawa. The wind hashira held his sword loosely, the green blade reflecting the embers. He looked at the dissolving bodies, then at the man in the iron mask. There was no admiration in his eyes. There was a manic, dangerous intensity. Sanemi stepped into the cave, his scars twisting as he sneered. He kicked the pile of ash that used to be the sensory demon. Sanemi spoke, his voice scratching against the silence. He noted the mess. He noted the lack of elegance. He called Bruce a butcher, a rat fighting in the dirt. He asked if this was what the foreigner called fighting. Bruce didn't answer. He set his broken arm with a sickening pop, gritting his teeth behind the mask. He picked up his serrated blade. Sanemi laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He declared that he had come to kill the demon that burned the village, and now he found a man who fought like one. He raised his sword. The air pressure in the cave dropped. The wind. Hashira was not going to arrest him. He was going to test him, and the passing grade was survival. The clash between the bat and the wind was a collision of incompatible systems. Sanemi moved with the speed of a hurricane. His breath of wind created vacuums, invisible sighs of air that sliced through the stone walls. Bruce could not match that speed. If he tried to race Sanemi, he would be diced. He had to slow the world down. He extinguished the forge with a kick, plunging the cave into darkness. For Sanemi, this was a minor inconvenience. He could sense the killing intent. For Bruce, this was home. Sanemi slashed, a wide arc meant to bisect the cave. Wind-breathing, fourth form, rising dust storm. The attack pulverized the workbench. Bruce was already gone. He was in the rafters. He threw 3 bolas, weighted chains made of Nichiren steel. Sanemi deflected them with a contemptuous flick of his wrist. But the chains were not meant to hit him. They hit the stalactites above him. The heavy stones crashed down. Sanemi dodged, weaving through the falling debris. This was the Batman's strategy. Environmental weaponization. He turned the cave into a hazard zone. Bruce dropped from the shadows, not aiming for Sanemi, but for the floor. He smashed a jar of oil he had been refining. The floor became slick. Sanemi's footing, usually perfect, wavered for a fraction of a second. Bruce lunged. He didn't use a sword technique. He used a linebacker tackle, driving his shoulder into Sanemi's midsection. It was ugly. It was effective. They hit the wall. Bruce hammered a punch into Sanemi's ribs, his iron knuckles bruising the hashira through his uniform. Sanemi roared, a blast of wind throwing Bruce back. Sanemi was bleeding. A small cut on his cheek from a stray stone shard. He touched the blood, and his eyes dilated. The Marechi blood. The scent filled the small space, intoxicating and enraged. Sanemi smiled, a look of pure violence. He prepared the 7th form. Gale. Sudden gusts. This was it. The execute. Stop. The word was not shouted. It was projected with a force that cut through the bloodlust. Urokodaki stood at the entrance, his presence filling the void. He did not draw a weapon. He simply existed as an absolute barrier. Sanemi froze, his blade mid-swing. He looked at the former water hashira, his chest heaving. He respected the elder, but his rage was palpable. He demanded to know why Urokodaki harbored the heretic. Urokodaki walked into the cave, ignoring the tension. He looked at Bruce, who was leaning against the wall, one arm hanging uselessly, his breath rattling in his chest. Urokodaki spoke to the wind hashira. He explained that the demons were changing, that Muzan was evolving. He pointed to the ash on the floor. These demons were assassins sent specifically for the foreigner. If Bruce died, the knowledge died. If Bruce died, the demons would simply take the technology from his corpse. Sanemi spat on the ground. He sheathed his sword with a violent click. He warned Bruce that the next time they met, if he smelled even a hint of a demon on him, he would not stop. He turned and left, the storm walking away into the night. Bruce slid down the wall, the adrenaline crash hitting him like a physical blow. Urokodaki knelt beside him, inspecting the broken arm. He told Bruce that he was foolish, that he could not fight the hashira with tricks. Bruce looked at his mentor through the iron mask. He whispered that he didn't need to beat them. He just needed to show them that his way worked. He pointed to the ash piles. 3 dead demons, 0 casualties, efficiency. But the victory was hollow. Bruce realized that he was now fighting a war on 2 fronts. The demons wanted his mind, the slayers wanted his head. He was an insurgency of one. He looked at the serrated blade in his hand. It wasn't enough. He needed to go deeper. He needed to understand the source of the demon's power to neutralize it. He needed to find the blue spider lily, the intel from the village, the myth. If it was a biological agent, it could be synthesized. It could be inverted. The recovery took weeks. During that time, Bruce refined his breathing. He stopped trying to mimic the elemental forms. He stripped the metaphysics away. He developed a technique based on rhythm and stealth. Breath of the void. It was a technique of absence, lowering the heart rate to near death, moving in the blind spots of the eye, striking only when the opponent blinked. It was the martial application of the Batman entity. News arrived via Kasugai Crow, a train, the Mugen train. Reports of disappearances, 40 passengers. Rengoku, the flame hashira, was being dispatched, and with him, the boys. Tanjiro, Zenitsu, and Nosuke. Bruce heard the report and felt a cold knot in his stomach. A train was a machine, a closed system. If a demon controlled a train, it was a scenario he understood better than anyone. A hostage situation on a moving vehicle. This was his territory. He packed his gear, the iron mask, the serrated blade, the flash powder, the smoke pellets. He didn't ask Urokodaki for permission. He simply bowed to the master. Urokodaki handed him a box. Inside was a new cloak, woven from the same material as the Slayer uniforms, resistant to claws and fire, dyed a deep midnight blue. A silent endorsement. Bruce descended the mountain. He was not a hashira. He was not a samurai. He was a detective entering a crime scene. He moved toward the train station, a dark blot on the landscape. He knew something the Slayers didn't. He knew that if Muzan was interested in technology, the train wasn't just a feeding ground. It was a testbed, a prototype. As he reached the tracks, he saw the steam engine in the distance, a beast of iron and fire cutting through the dark. He didn't buy a ticket. He fired his grapple gun, the new iron hook catching the rear guardrail of the caboose. He hauled himself on board, the wind tearing at his cloak. He was the stowaway, the variable that Enmu could not dream of. The nightmare was not waiting for the passengers to fall asleep. The nightmare had just boarded the train, and he was wide awake. The systemic clash had begun. The feudal era was about to crash into the industrial reality of the Batman. And on the Mugen train, the tracks ran only one way, toward a derailment that would shake the pillars of reality. The sound of the train whistle, a scream that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. The rhythmic clatter of the Mugen train against the iron rails was not a sound of industry to the stowaway clinging to the undercarriage. It was the heartbeat of a predator. Bruce Wayne, encased in his scavenged armor of blackened iron and woven hemp, moved with the precarious grace of a spider across the dark, grease-stained belly of the locomotive. The wind whipped at his dark blue cloak, threatening to tear his grip loose, but his gauntlets, modified with hooked climbing claws forged from the river's iron sand, bit deep into the steel chassis. He was not merely a passenger. He was a diagnostic tool searching for a fault line. His sensory input was limited. The high-tech cowl was gone, replaced by the primitive iron half-mask that filtered the smoke and narrowed his field of vision to a tactical slit. He had to rely on the vibrations running through the metal, the temperature gradients of the steam pipes, and the smell. The smell was wrong. Beneath the burning coal and the ozone of the boiler, there was the scent of raw meat, of enzymatic digestion. The train was not carrying passengers. It was marinating them. He reached the coupling between the coal tender and the first passenger car. He pulled himself up, sliding through the shadows of the vestibule. The door mechanism was locked, but a single precise strike with a tension wrench made from a demon's rib bone snapped the tumblers. He slipped inside. The carriage was dimly lit by gas lamps that flickered with a low, hypnotic hum. The passengers were silent, too silent. They sat in rows, heads lolling, chests rising and falling in a synchronized rhythm that defied statistical probability. Batman moved down the aisle, his boots wrapped in soft cloth to dampen the sound. He checked a pulse. Slow, deep, REM sleep. He checked another. The same. He approached the ticket collector, who stood motionless at the end of the car. As Batman reached out, he saw the ticket puncher's hand was fused to the brass rail, not gripped, fused. The flesh had melted into the metal, veins running like copper wiring along the fixture. The integration had begun. This was not just a spell. It was a biological annexation of the machine. Batman retreated to the shadows as the door at the far end opened. The conductor entered, his face blank, his eyes wide and vacant. He did not see the dark figure pressed into the luggage rack above. He simply walked through the car, muttering about tickets and dreams. Batman analyzed the threat. If he engaged now, he risked waking the host organism, the train itself. If the train recoiled, it could derail, killing everyone on board. He needed to locate the brain. He needed to find the source of the frequency keeping them sedated. He moved to the next car and the next, moving closer to the engine. In the third car, he found them. The Slayers. Rengoku Kyojuro sat with his arms crossed, a smile plastered on his face, radiating a heat that Batman could feel from 5 feet away. The boy, Tanjiro, was next to him, tears streaming down his face in his sleep. The blonde one was drooling. The one with the boar head was twitching. They were compromised. Batman considered his options. He could try to wake them physically, but if the sleep was induced by a neurochemical agent or a blood demon art, physical trauma might trigger shock or brain death. He needed a counteragent. He pulled a small vial from his belt. Wisteria concentrate mixed with ammonium carbonate, smelling salts for the supernatural age. He cracked the vial under Tanjiro's nose. The reaction was not immediate. The boy's brow furrowed. He was fighting a battle on a different plane. Batman watched, analyzing the struggle. He saw the boy's hand grip the hilt of his sword, his knuckles whitening. Tanjiro was trying to wake up. Batman understood the will required. He whispered a command, low and harsh, into the boy's ear, anchoring him to reality. "Wake up." The boy gasped, his eyes snapping open. He didn't scream. He inhaled, the water-breathing conditioning kicking in instantly. He looked up and saw the demon in the iron mask. For a second, Tanjiro flinched, mistaking Batman for a monster, but the recognition came. The man from the snowy mountain. The artificer. Batman put a finger to his masked lips. He handed Tanjiro the vial and pointed to Rengoku. Then he pointed to the floorboards. He gestured with a cutting motion. The enemy is underneath. The enemy is the floor. Tanjiro nodded, his eyes hardening. He understood. Batman didn't wait. He vanished back into the shadows, moving toward the engine. He had a different objective. While the Slayers fought the spirit, Batman would kill the body. He reached the door to the engine room. It was sealed with flesh. A membrane of thick, pulsating muscle covered the steel. Batman drew his serrated blade. He didn't hack. He heated the blade with a friction flare, a small chemical igniter, until the iron glowed dull red. He sliced through the membrane. The train screamed. It was not a mechanical whistle. It was a vocalization of pain that shook the chassis. The flesh walls rippled and mouths opened in the steel, gnashing teeth forming from the rivets. Batman was instantly under assault. Tentacles of meat and wire lashed out from the walls. He dropped to a crouch, entering the void state. His heart rate dropped to 30 beats per minute. He became an object in the room, minimizing his presence. The tentacles thrashed blindly, missing him by inches. He moved forward, stepping in the rhythm of the train's sway. He reached the boiler. It wasn't burning coal anymore. It was burning bones. A face formed in the smoke. Enmu. The lower moon one looked at the intruder with a mix of amusement and confusion. He had put the hashira to sleep. He had trapped the children. But this thing, this man, had no dreams to enter. Or rather, his mind was a fortress of such disciplined trauma that the demon spores couldn't find a purchase. Enmu laughed, his voice echoing through the steam. He mocked the Batman, calling him a rat in a snake's belly. He boasted that he was the train, that his blood pumped through the pistons. To kill him, the Batman would have to destroy the vessel and kill the hostages. Batman didn't speak. He worked. He pulled 4 magnetic charges from his belt. They were crude, casings made of clay and iron, filled with a mixture of gunpowder and refined wisteria pollen. He wasn't trying to blow up the train. He was trying to poison the bloodstream. He slapped the charges onto the main drive pistons. Enmu realized the intent too late. The demon tried to crush Batman with a mass of flesh, but the Dark Knight rolled, deploying a flash pellet that burned with UV intensity. Enmu shrieked as the light seared his exposed eyes. Batman detonated the charges. The explosion was contained but devastating. The wisteria dust was forced into the high-pressure steam system. It circulated instantly through the train's veins. The biological components of the train seized up. The flesh turned grey and necrotic. The train lurched, the wheels locking. At the same time, on the roof, Tanjiro and Inosuke were executing their attack. Batman felt the severance. A massive shift in pressure as the neck bone, the connection between the locomotive and the cars, was severed. The train screamed one last time, a sound of twisting metal and dying god complex, and jumped the tracks. The crash was catastrophic. The locomotive ploughed into the earth, rolling twice, shedding iron and timber in a shower of sparks. Batman was thrown inside the engine room, bouncing off the superheated walls. His armor absorbed the impacts, but the kinetic energy rattled his brain. He blacked out for 3 seconds. When he woke, he was upside down, pinned beneath a twisted pipe. He didn't panic. He dislocated his thumb to slip his hand free, then leveraged the pipe off his chest with his legs. He crawled out of the wreckage into the cool night air. The scene was a ruin. The train lay like a slain dragon, its guts spilling out. Miraculously, the passenger cars had remained upright, slowed by Rengoku's technique before the crash. The flame hashira was standing amidst the debris, his cape billowing, directing the evacuation. He was unhurt. He was radiant. He was shouting orders, ensuring the injured were tended to. Tanjiro was on the ground, wounded but alive, clutching his stomach. The demon Enmu was disintegrating, his body turning to ash as he cursed the Slayers. It was a victory. It was the end of the arc. But Batman felt the hair on his arm stand up. The air pressure changed. It wasn't the wind. It was a gravity well of malice descending from the sky. He looked up. Something landed in the clearing, 50 yards away. The impact didn't make a sound. It simply suppressed the noise of the world. Dust rose in a perfect circle. From the dust walked a figure. Striped skin, pink hair, golden eyes that held the text, Upper Rank 3. Akaza. He did not look at the train. He did not look at the civilians. He looked at Rengoku, the battle spirit of the flame. Hashira was a beacon in the night, a roaring fire that drew the moth. Akaza smiled, a genuine, welcoming smile. He complimented Rengoku's energy. He invited him to become a demon. Rengoku refused, his voice steady, his sword held high. The philosophical clash began. The demon who despised weakness against the human who championed mortality. Batman watched from the cover of the twisted engine. He was invisible to them. He was not a warrior in their eyes. He was debris. He analyzed the power levels. Rengoku was strong, stronger than Giyu. But Akaza was something else. The demon was not just regenerating. He was adapting in real time. Every stance Rengoku took, Akaza adjusted his footing before the strike was thrown. It was precognition. No, Batman corrected himself. It was a compass. The demon was tracking the intent to kill. He was reading the vector of the spirit. The fight began. It was a blur of flame and shock waves. Flame breathing, first form. Destructive death, compass needle. The ground shattered. Trees were uprooted. Tanjiro tried to move to help, but the pressure kept him pinned. This was a battle of gods. Batman ran the simulations in his head. Rengoku was trading blows, but he was taking damage. A smashed eye, a broken rib. Akaza was healing instantly. The math was linear. In 3 minutes, Rengoku Kyojuro would be dead. Batman checked his belt. He had no more explosives. He had his serrated blade. He had a grapple gun with 30 feet of cable. And he had a single experimental canister he had been saving. A prototype fear toxin, distilled from the hallucinogenic mushrooms of the mountain and modified with the demon blood he had studied. It was designed to attack the amygdala, but would it work on a creature that had shed its humanity centuries ago? He didn't know. The climax approached. Rengoku summoned his final technique. 9th form, Rengoku. A dragon of fire manifested, lighting up the night. Akaza laughed, preparing his counter. Destructive death, annihilation type. They charged. The collision would be fatal. Rengoku would aim for the neck. Akaza would aim for the solar plexus. The donut hole. The inevitability of the timeline pressed down on the scene. Batman made the choice. He did not choose to attack Akaza. Attacks carried battle spirit, and Akaza would sense it and counter. Batman chose to remove the target. He stepped out of the void, but he did not ignite his spirit. He remained a hole in the world. He raised his grapple gun. He didn't aim at the demon. He aimed at Rengoku's belt. The trigger clicked. The hook fired. It was a pneumatic hiss, lost in the roar of the fire dragon. The hook caught the back of Rengoku's uniform just as the Hashira launched himself. The cable went taut. Batman engaged the winch, digging his iron boots into the ground. He hauled back with everything he had. The trajectory shifted. Rengoku's charge was altered by 3 degrees. It was a microscopic deviation in a supersonic collision, but it was enough. Akaza's fist, aimed for the heart, missed the center mass. It tore through Rengoku's side, shattering the hip and taking a chunk of oblique muscle, but it missed the vital organs. Rengoku's blade, thrown off course, didn't hit the neck. It slashed deep into Akaza's shoulder, severing the arm halfway. The explosion of energy threw them apart. Rengoku crashed into the dirt, bleeding heavily, incapacitated but alive. Akaza landed on his feet, confused. He looked at his hand. It wasn't covered in heart blood. He looked at Rengoku. The hashira was alive. Why? His compass had been perfect. The vector was absolute. Then Akaza felt it. Or rather, he felt the absence of it. He turned his head. Standing by the wreckage of the train, holding a smoking grapple gun, was the shadow. The Iron Man. There was no battle spirit coming from him. There was no anger, no hate, no fear. Just a cold calculation of physics. To Akaza, Batman looked like a statue. A non-entity. You, Akaza whispered. The smile dropped from his face. You interfered. Batman dropped the grapple gun. He stepped between the fallen Rengoku and the upper moon. He knew he couldn't win. He couldn't fight this thing. He was an ant standing before a storm. But he had changed the equation. Rengoku was alive. The sun was cresting the horizon behind the mountains. He had to stall. He's beaten, Batman said. His voice modulated by the iron mask, deep and metallic. Leave him. Akaza stared at the Batman. He was intrigued. A human with no spirit. A warrior who used tools to alter the destiny of a duel. It was disgusting. It was weak. And yet, it had worked. Akaza regenerated his arm. He stepped forward. You are the artificer. Muzan-sama has spoken of you. Batman stood his ground. He held up the canister of fear toxin. He didn't know if the demon knew what a grenade was. He pulled the pin. Come and see. Akaza moved. He didn't use a technique. He just dashed. He covered the distance in a blink. Batman threw the canister down. Green gas exploded, enveloping them both. Batman held his breath. Akaza inhaled. For a split second, the upper moon paused. The toxin hit the demon's brain. Akaza saw something. He saw a woman in a kimono, sick and dying. He saw his own human face. The memory, buried deep beneath layers of monster, flickered. It wasn't fear of a bat. It was the fear of loss. Akaza screamed, clutching his head. It bought Batman 2 seconds. He dove for Rengoku, grabbing the hashira by the collar and dragging him back toward the rising sun. Tanjiro, seeing the opening, threw his sword. The blade spun through the air, piercing Akaza's chest. Akaza snapped out of the hallucination. The sun was hitting the treetops. He was out of time. He looked at the Batman, who was dragging the flame hashira away like a sack of grain. He looked at the boy who had thrown the sword. Rage filled him. He couldn't kill Rengoku now. The moment was gone, but he couldn't leave empty-handed. He needed to break something. Akaza vanished. He reappeared next to Batman. He didn't strike Rengoku. He struck the source of the interference. He backhanded Batman. The blow was casual for an upper moon, but for a human, it was a wrecking ball. The iron mask shattered. The armor on Batman's chest caved in. Ribs pulverized. A lung collapsed. Batman was launched into the forest, snapping trees as he flew. He hit a boulder and stopped. He didn't move. Akaza stood there, looking at the broken toy. He reached down and picked up the shattered remains of the grapple gun and the empty toxin canister. Weak, Akaza spat. Tricks for the weak. The sunlight touched the clearing. Akaza hissed, his skin burning. He turned and fled into the dark of the forest, carrying the pieces of Wayne Tech with him. Tanjiro screamed at his retreating back, calling him a coward, calling him to come back and fight. But Akaza was gone. Silence returned to the crash site. Rengoku lay in a pool of his own blood, breathing shallowly. He was missing a chunk of his side. His hip was destroyed, but his heart was beating. He looked toward the tree line where Batman had been thrown. "Boy," Rengoku rasped to Tanjiro. "The man in iron. Find him." Tanjiro scrambled through the brush, Inosuke close behind. They found Bruce Wayne slumped against the rock. His face was exposed, the mask gone. He was bleeding from the mouth, his skin grey. His chest rose with a terrifying rattling sound. He was alive, but barely. He had taken a hit meant for Hashira. Tanjiro knelt beside him, tears falling again. He didn't know what to do. The smell of death was clinging to the artificer. Bruce opened one eye. It was swollen shut, but the other focused on Tanjiro. He tried to speak. Blood bubbled past his lips. He needed to convey the intel. He needed them to know. Akaza had taken the tech. Muzan would reverse engineer it. The timeline hadn't just changed. It had escalated. "He took it," Bruce whispered, the words barely audible. "The mechanism. He knows." Then Bruce Wayne passed out. The scene dissolved into the frantic arrival of the Kakushi cleanup crew. They loaded Rengoku onto a stretcher. They loaded Bruce Wayne onto another. The flame hashira and the Dark Knight, both broken, both alive. The narrative of the Demon Slayer world had been violently rewritten. Rengoku Kyojuro, the man destined to die to inspire the generation, had survived, but the cost was the exposure of the Batman. The Shadow was no longer a myth. He was the casualty of war, carried into the heart of the Demon Slayer Corps not as a prisoner, but as a savior who had paid the price of admission in blood. As the sun fully rose, illuminating the wreckage of the Mugen train, the consequences began to ripple out. In the Infinity Castle, Akaza knelt before Muzan. He presented the grapple gun and the canister. Muzan took the device. His fingers, capable of tearing steel, handled the delicate machinery with a surgeon's care. He smelled the wisteria residue. He smelled the complex polymers. He smiled. The knowledge of the future had been delivered to the ancient past. The arms race had begun. The image of Rengoku and Bruce, lying side by side in the Butterfly Mansion infirmary, hooked up to drips. The flame was dim but burning. The bat was broken. And outside, the world was preparing for a war that would no longer follow the script of history. The small choice, a grapple hook instead of a sword, had saved a man and damned the world to a chaotic, unpredictable future. The sterile scent of rubbing alcohol and concentrated wisteria tea was the first thing to pull Bruce Wayne from the darkness. It was a sensory anchor, pulling his mind back from the fragmented memories of Gotham and the burning image of the Mugen train. He did not wake with a gasp. His eyes opened, tracking the wooden ceiling beams, his heart rate accelerating from a hibernation pulse to a combat rhythm in 3 seconds. He tried to sit up, but his body refused. He was bound not by ropes, but by the catastrophic failure of his own skeletal structure. His chest was a lattice of bandages, his left arm encased in a rigid bamboo cast, and his legs felt heavy, distant, as if they belonged to another man. He was in the Butterfly Mansion. He knew the layout from his reconnaissance, but being a patient was a tactical disadvantage he despised. Sitting in a chair beside his futon, sharpening a syringe with a whetstone, was Shinobu Kocho. She did not look up. She simply stated that if he moved again, she would inject him with a paralytic that would make his current pain feel like a massage. Her voice was light, airy, and carried a killing intent that rivaled the demon's. Bruce Wayne spoke, his voice a ruin of gravel and blood. He did not ask about his health. He asked about the inventory. He needed to know exactly what was left at the crash site. Shinobu paused her sharpening. She looked at the man, who was more scar tissue than skin. She told him the report. Rengoku Kyojuro was alive, stable but missing a portion of his hip and oblique muscles. His career as a hashira was effectively over, but his life was not. The boys were battered but healing. But the equipment, the metal rope launcher, the green gas canister, and the fragments of his armor were gone, taken by the upper rank. Bruce closed his eyes. The calculation was complete. He had saved one man and armed a god. He explained to Shinobu with cold, clinical precision what was about to happen. He explained the concept of reverse engineering. He explained that Muzan Kibutsuji was not just a monster. He was a biological supercomputer. He had given the enemy the blueprints for industrial warfare. The timeline did not wait for Bruce to heal. In the Infinity Castle, the laws of physics were being rewritten. Muzan held the grapple gun in hands that could manipulate cellular biology. He did not need a factory. He had the flesh. He dissected the mechanism, understanding the spring tension, the pneumatic compression, the gear ratios. He tasted the wisteria polymer. He understood the chemistry. He summoned Gyoko, the upper rank 5, the artist of pots and twisted bodies. He gave the command. He did not want art. He wanted efficiency. He wanted range. He wanted the ability to kill the slayers before they could draw their swords. He handed Gyoko the fear toxin canister. He ordered the cultivation of a new strain of blood demon art, one that could be aerosolized. The Industrial Revolution had arrived in the Taisho era, powered by demon blood. 3 weeks later, the war changed. It started with the silence. The Kasugai crows stopped reporting from the western districts. No bodies were found. No screams were heard. Just silence. Then, the first survivor stumbled into a wisteria safe house. It was a lower-ranked slayer, half his face melted, clutching a piece of jagged, organic shrapnel embedded in his shoulder. He died before he could speak, but the shrapnel told the story. Bruce, now mobile enough to sit in a wheelchair, examined the object in the mansion's lab. It wasn't just bone. It was bone spiraled into a rifled slug. It was a bullet. The demons were shooting. The attack on the Butterfly Mansion did not happen at night. It happened at twilight, exploiting the dim light where shadows were longest. The warning came not from a scout, but from the sonic boom of the first impact. A projectile, fired from the tree line a mile away, punched through the outer wall of the estate, obliterating the medical wing's pharmacy. The explosion was not gunpowder. It was pressurized gas and bone fragments. The alarm bells rang, but they were drowned out by the bombardment. Bruce Wayne threw himself from his wheelchair, adrenaline overriding the agony of his healing fractures. He shouted for Tanjiro. He shouted for everyone to get down. The enemy wasn't charging. They were sieging. Tanjiro, Inosuke, and Zenitsu burst into the courtyard, weapons drawn, looking for a neck to slice. There were no necks. There were only shapes in the distance, perched in the trees, modified demons. They looked like gargoyles, their arms transformed into biological cannons, their chests swollen with compressed air sacs. They fired a volley. Bone slugs tore through the wooden engawa, shredding paper doors and tatami mats. Inosuke charged, screaming, but the ground in front of him erupted. They were bracketing the target. Bruce saw the pattern. It was a kill box. He dragged himself to the veranda, grabbing a handful of throwing spikes he had hidden under his pillow. He couldn't fight, but he could command. He grabbed Tanjiro by the hari, pulling him down just as a slug took off the top of a stone lantern. Bruce barked orders. He told them to stop looking for a duel. This was suppression. He ordered Zenitsu to the roof, not to fight, but to use his hearing to triangulate the firing positions. He ordered Inosuke to dig, to create trenches. He ordered Tanjiro to shield the patients. The chaos was absolute, but the voice of the Batman cut through it. He was the conductor of a desperate symphony. He realized the mansion was a trap. They were sitting ducks in a wooden box. They needed to close the distance, but the open ground was a death zone. Then the second wave hit. These were not snipers. These were the breach team. Large, hulking demons, their skin plated with thick, callous armor that mimicked the composite plating of the batsuit. They didn't have swords. They had battering rams fused to their arms. They crashed through the gates, shrugging off the wisteria incense. The poison didn't work. They were wearing masks, flesh grafted over their mouths and noses, filtering the air. Muzan had learned. He had inoculated his troops. Shinobu Kocho, moving with the speed of an angry wasp, landed on the back of one of the juggernauts. She thrust her stinger, injecting her potent poison. The demon didn't die. It laughed. A valve in its neck opened, venting the poisoned blood in a hiss of steam, and fresh blood pumped in to replace it. A circulatory bypass system. Shinobu's eyes widened in horror. Her science had been countered. Gyu Tomioka and Kanao Tsuyuri joined the fray, their swords flashing. They could cut the demons, but their armor was dense. It required multiple strikes to sever a limb, and in that time, the other demons swarmed. The Slayers were being overwhelmed by sheer tactical superiority. The demons were working in squads. One suppressed, one flanked, one killed. It was military doctrine applied to monsters. Bruce watched his worst nightmare unfold. He had tried to bring order to this world, and instead, he had given order to chaos. He saw Rengoku, leaning on a crutch in the hallway, his sword drawn, frustration etched on his face. The flame hashira wanted to die fighting, not cowering in a shelled building. Bruce knew they had to abandon the mansion, but they couldn't outrun the snipers. They needed a distraction, a massive one. He looked at the wreckage of the pharmacy, the chemicals, the volatile compounds Shinobu used for her poisons. He looked at the layout of the estate, the gas lines for the lamps. It was a bomb waiting to go off. He called Shinobu to him. He didn't ask for permission. He told her to prep the evacuation. He was going to burn her house down. Shinobu looked at the destruction, at the dying Slayers, and nodded. She understood the cost of war now. Bruce needed a delivery system. He couldn't walk, but he could glide. He had the boys scavenge the silk sheets from the laundry, the bamboo poles from the training ground. He constructed a crude frame. He strapped himself into it. It wasn't the bat glider. It was a kite. He ordered Inosuke to throw him. The boar-headed boy didn't question it. He grabbed Bruce by the waist and hurled him off the roof with a roar. The wind caught the silk. Bruce ascended, pain ripping through his broken ribs. He was airborne. He became the target. Every demon eye turned to the black shape in the sky. The bone slugs whistled past him. He didn't dodge. He couldn't. He relied on the chaotic updrafts of the burning building. He flew over the courtyard, dropping his payload, jars of volatile oil mixed with flash powder, lit by a fuse of burning hemp. He carpet-bombed the demon squads. The explosions were blinding. The flash disrupted their enhanced vision. The demons screamed, their tactical coordination breaking for a critical minute. "Now!" Bruce screamed from the sky. "Push!" The Slayers counterattacked. Tanjiro, utilizing the cover of the smoke, closed the distance to the snipers. He breathed, mixing the sun-breathing with the rhythm Bruce had taught him. Hinokami Kagura, flash dance. He moved faster than the slugs. He severed the cannons. Giyu and Sanemi, who had arrived as reinforcements, tore through the armored breach team. They targeted the joints, the unarmored gaps Bruce had identified from his aerial vantage point. It was a slaughter, but a calculated one. They weren't fighting for honor. They were fighting to clear a path. Bruce crash-landed in the rice paddy outside the walls, the impact shattering his makeshift glider and re-breaking his left leg. He lay in the mud, gasping. A shadow fell over him. It wasn't a Slayer. It was Gyoko. The upper moon slithered out of a pot that had been fired from a mortar. He looked different. His scales were metallic. His eyes were replaced by polished lenses. He held a device in his hand, a copy of the grapple gun, but the hook was a living, barbed tongue. Gyoko giggled, a sound like grinding glass. He mocked the artist of the West. He thanked Bruce for the inspiration. He aimed the biological grapple at Bruce's head. Bruce couldn't move. He had no gadgets, no armor, only the mud and his mind. He looked Gyoko in the lens. He didn't blink. He began to whisper, a low rhythmic chant, not a prayer, a count. 3, 2, 1. In the distance, inside the main hall of the mansion, the gas main that Bruce had instructed Rengoku to sever finally met the candle he had told Rengoku to leave burning. The butterfly mansion vanished. It didn't burn. It disintegrated. The explosion was a thermobaric event, fueled by the pressurized gas and the stores of alcohol. The shockwave flattened the rice paddy. Gyoko was thrown sideways, his pot shattering. The blast wave rolled over Bruce, pressing him into the mud, burning his back. The distraction was absolute. The explosion wiped out the remaining demon squads inside the perimeter and sent a plume of fire into the sky that could be seen for miles. In the confusion, the Slayers retreated. They carried the wounded. They carried the civilians. And Tanjiro carried Bruce Wayne. They ran into the deep woods, into the night, leaving the burning symbol of the Demon Slayer core behind them. They didn't stop until dawn. They reached an abandoned temple high in the mountains. The group was battered, demoralized and homeless. The hashira gathered around Bruce, who was lying on the temple floor, consciousness fading in and out. Sanemi wanted to kill him. He blamed Bruce for the destruction of their sanctuary. Giyu stood between them, silent. Shinobu was treating wounds, her face a mask of cold fury. But it wasn't directed at Bruce. It was directed at the reality of their situation. Bruce forced his eyes open. He looked at the pillars of the organization. He told them the truth. The war of shadows was over. The demons had industrialized. If the Slayers continued to fight with swords and tradition, they would be extinct in a month. Muzan was building an army. They needed to build one too. He looked at the swordsmiths who had escaped with them. He looked at the heavy oars they carried. No more swords, Bruce rasped, coughing blood. We need armor. We need ballistics. We need to turn the sun into a weapon. He sketched in the dust of the floor. He drew a design that he had been holding in his mind since the cave. It wasn't a katana. It was a gauntlet, a sunlight emitter, a pressure wave generator powered by the breath. He looked at Tanjiro. You can't just breathe anymore, Bruce said to the boy. You have to become the storm. The convergence did not end with a handshake. It ended with a grim acceptance of a new paradigm. The Demon Slayer core was dead. What was born in that temple was a paramilitary resistance. Bruce Wayne, the man who had sworn never to use a gun, began to design the schematics for a Nichiren barrel rifle. He had broken his one rule, conceptually, if not physically, because the alternative was the extinction of the human race in this dimension. High above, in the Infinity Castle, Muzan watched the smoke rise from the butterfly mansion. He was pleased. He held the charred remains of a Slayer's uniform. He didn't care about the territory. He cared about the escalation. He felt the thrill of a challenge he hadn't felt in 1,000 years. The game had evolved. He turned to his remaining upper moons, Akaza, Doma, Kokushibo. He ordered them to prepare for total war. No more hiding in the night. They would march. Back in the temple, the sun rose on a changed world. The age of myths was over. The age of steel and blood had begun. Bruce Wayne closed his eyes, his mind already running the simulations for the next battle. He was no longer the Dark Knight. He was the warlord of the Ash. And as the screen faded to black, the sound was not of a sword sheathing, but of a hammer striking an anvil, forging something terrible and necessary for the dark days to come. The intersection of realities had resulted in a mutual loss of innocence. There was no going back. There was only the forward march into the meat grinder. The Taisho era did not end with the gentle passing of an emperor, but with the grinding screech of gears and the roar of industrial furnaces. History records this period not as the time of romance, but as the war of the Iron Sun. The seasons lost their poetic meaning when the smoke from the resistance forges permanently stained the sky, turning the days into a perpetual grey twilight that favoured neither human nor demon. In the fortified valleys of the northern Alps, the remnants of the Demon Slayer Corps operated with the cold, brutal efficiency of the man who had reshaped them. The Corps was a memory, preserved only in the tattered Horus hanging in the shrine of the fallen. In its place stood the Sun Battalion. They did not wear flowing cloth. They wore matte black plate armor forged from the scarlet crimson ore. Pressurized suits designed to amplify the breath and filter the neurotoxins that Muzan's forces now deployed as standard ordnance. Tanjiro Kamado stood on the ramparts of the Iron Temple, looking out over the blackened tree line. He looked decades older than his actual age, a jagged scar running from his forehead to his jaw, mirroring the harsh lines of the new world. He did not carry a wooden box on his back anymore. He carried a heavy pneumatic repeater, a weapon designed by the artificer that fired slivers of sunlight-soaked iron at supersonic speeds. His sword remained at his hip, but it was a secondary tool, a relic reserved for the desperate close-quarters butchery that occurred when the ammunition ran dry. Down in the mud of the courtyard, Zenitsu Agatsuma was not crying or sleeping. He was wiring a perimeter grid with copper filaments capable of conducting the breath of thunder, creating a kill zone of localized lightning. Inosuke Hashibira wore a helmet of tempered steel modeled after a boar, his wild instincts now channeled into the command of the trench-digging crews. They were no longer children of a lost summer. They were soldiers of a forever winter. Deep within the temple, in a command center lit only by the glow of molten metal and tactical displays, Bruce Wayne sat in a chair he could no longer leave without mechanical assistance. His body was a ruin, a map of failures and fractures held together by iron braces and sheer will. But his mind was the central processor of the entire human resistance. He watched the troop movements on a massive map that covered the floor. He moved pieces of slate representing squads, sacrificing pawns to save knights, trading territory for time. There was no bat signal in the sky. There was only the red glare of the warning fires on the mountain peaks. He had saved humanity from immediate extinction, but in doing so, he had stripped it of its poetry. He had turned the breathing styles into combustion cycles and the pillars into structural supports for a war machine. A Kasugai Crow, now armored in light tin plating to protect against aerial interception, landed on the table. It delivered a report from the Southern Front, a tactical victory. 3 lower moons eliminated by a coordinated artillery strike using wisteria napalm. Bruce did not smile. He did not feel relief. He simply marked the casualty count in his ledger with a steady hand. The Batman of Gotham had fought to prevent tragedy, to save the soul of a city. The warlord of the Ash fought only to ensure that when the last human died, they would die standing on a pile of empty shell casings. The crossover had not saved the world. It had merely armed it for the apocalypse. The timeline was locked, not in hope, but in the grim metallic certainty of survival at any cost.